make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Okay.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. All right, so we do have quite a bit to cover tonight, but I think as we've all kind of learned, there's been a significant amount of work that's been done over decades. And I see our role in, hopefully the board, or the task force agrees that finding ways that we can solidify all the work of many years, that the story has found its way to be consistent. A lot of the stories that, or the work that is done, you know, in the 1989 plan, which I'm sure we'll reference today, and then the work in the 2000s and 2017 are all things that have been discussed, have a lot of community input. And now how can we take all of that information, all of that work, and try to make more effective use out of it, and hopefully get some continued progress and results. So the next item up on the agenda is the review and discussion of previous initiatives, task force, and committees work. So we discussed in our previous meeting that we wanted to have, in particular, John Burnham, who is from the previous housing task force, to kind of discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So.
Oh, well, thank you. So, you know, I just kind of did a quick timeline, but really don't want to spend too much time on this as it is in the past. But as most of you know, as John had just pointed out, you know, there's been task force and groups that have been just working on this over many years prior to this past task force. But back in October of 2022, Kathleen James and the previous Planning Commission Chair, Phil Peterson, was he the chair? I don't know, maybe I'm making up a title for him. To ask the MBA to actually send out a survey to our member businesses because they wanted to get an idea of what businesses were experiencing. So we did, and that survey came back to them, and they compiled all the results of that service. And so that's in actually our documents in there. So if you ever want to kind of look at what those results were, but I mean, it's a lot of the things we continue to talk about. Shortly after that, at the same time, the town of Manchester was asking for RFPs for the Depot Street property. And so I think that's what kind of helped create this task force, this previous task force, was they actually wanted us in our first meeting in February of 2023 to kind of review those proposals that were sent to the town for that Depot Street project, which is what we did. We asked both the Shires Housing and Evernorth in the preceding months to come and do a presentation to the select board and the community members that were here. I'm sorry, not the select board, the task force and the community members that were here. And we also asked Kyle Murphy, who was with Cato Design, the only two people that actually are groups that submitted proposals. And, you know, we went through lots of details and questioning, and at the same time, above and beyond that, as a group, we were just talking about other things that we could get involved with, was try to help, like ADUs and that sort of stuff. The result of the presentations over those few months was us making a recommendation to the select board to accept the Shires Housing proposal because of all the details. Even though there were some elements as a task force we weren't 100% thrilled with, it was at least a start. Of course, from there, it went into the town's hands. Where it went from there, it just didn't. So that was that. Meanwhile, in the background, you know, we created 3 subcommittees, and those subcommittees kind of focused on a couple of topics. One was town-owned land for the longer term. Another group focused on the private land, communications, and public relations. And the third group focused on infill development, ADU, and short-term rentals in particular. And so those groups met separately. They were all composed of members of the actual task force. The smaller groups of them, and they brought in and talked to various people in various capacities and did their own research and data collecting. And then we would meet again after that and kind of go over some of that data. That also helped us start designing the ADU pamphlet that's been out there and it now exists. I'm not sure if it's still out there, but we finally got to a point where we felt it had enough details and stuff that we could put it out, print it, and we did. And then at the same time, we also, again, continue to have lots of different organizations come and present to us about what they were experiencing. Those organizations in particular were one that's Attainable Homeownership Presentation, Frank Shaw, which was about larger mixed-use developments, more like housing developments on larger parcels, where there were several units per building, just to kind of give an idea. In the end, they didn't give us any necessary things that would help us move forward. They just gave us a lot of information and plans and such like that. But it's a great resource if we ever go down that road.
What was
And
the
just
name
go
of
back
that
to-
one more time?
That was the Attainable Home Ownership Presentation.
Yep,
And that was more about home ownership than it was about rentals.
right.
And that's a company?
It's a group. Yeah.
Mhm.
We had the Vermont League of Towns and Cities do a presentation to us, and they went over some of the Manchester specific statistics as well as Vermont in general, the things that Manchester has done in particular with its zoning regulations, including, creating a task force to do this. And one of the focal points that they focused on with us and talked about in particular was going back to the Housing Trust Fund and how communities around Vermont in particular had been kind of implementing those, and Woodstock happens to be one of them that they mentioned. And shortly after that presentation, we reached out to Woodstock to have them do a presentation to us about their current Housing Trust Fund and how it's working with their Economic Development Committee and so forth, which they did. And again, a lot of these resources are within there. But in the end, what it did is it gave us a real kind of feeling that this could be something that worked. At the same time this was going on, the Depot Street property was potentially going to get sold, the whole property, which would have brought potentially $1.8 million maybe to the town. And we were really excited about that because we thought, well, if we can create this housing trust fund, a good portion of that money could go into that to help start making some progress on some of the other things we were working on at the time. Of course, that unfortunately fell through. And in the process of that, we also had the health impact assessment done by the Bennington County Office of Local Health that just talked about these types of projects, larger projects, what kind of health impact they could have on the community and so forth. And I'm not going to go into any detail about that. There's the presentation if you want to look at that. One of the interesting parts, just real quick about the Woodstock Housing Work Group presentation, is the majority of their money that they raised was about $350,000 a year, came from a 1% option tax revenue that they did on rooms and board, so rooms and meals, that they didn't have before. This was a new 1% that they introduced. So
Positive, yeah.
yeah, so they took that money, instead of giving it to anything else, they put it into this, the economic development side, and they put it into this housing trust. So that allowed them to hire a part-time person to kind of administer the program. They have 4 different levels of programs you can choose to put in requests for, whether it's be the ADU development in the community and how much money you would get and the requirements and how long you'd have to keep that as an affordable workforce type of rental, multiple unit housing rentals, leasing to local programs and home shares. And again, more of that information's out there. But that was another reason why we were like, maybe this is something we could do with this money that we might be able to get from the town from this property sale. So did that. And then of course, we're again going back to the ADUs and still working on that, looking at properties, reaching out to, just private property owners and looking at the possibilities for larger projects, but really not a ton we could do. Gordon and one of his teams did a lot of research on various ADU requirements and short-term rental things out there. But the short-term rental, meaning our existing short-term rentals that are here in our town, we're given the direction as a task force. Yeah, don't worry about that. Don't focus on that. You're not going to change that. You're not going to make an impact on it. So we kind of let that fall to the wayside, but just continue to focus just on the ADU development. and looked at other towns like Burlington and Woodstock, because Woodstock, again, same with ADUs, which is they created a program where someone who did it, not only could you get potentially up to 50,000 from the state of Vermont through VIP, I think it's VIP, but you could also get it in Woodstock, another $10,000 to the building or development of that unit with certain requirements to that. So that was also something we were looking to do with that money that we might acquire through the sale of the Depot Street, not we, but the task force and the Housing Trust Fund. So, and then we were into the beginning of this year, in the beginning of 2024, probably March or April, and then we got a sense that we weren't necessarily an organization that was recognized. So, we got together, we voted and disbanded the group. Nothing negative, nothing positive, it's just how it happened.
Well, first, thanks for the efforts.
Yeah.
For both you and Gordon, because I know you were there for those meetings too. And thank you for that. I think it sounds to me that you had a lot of really positive potential ideas that came out of your work and speaking with other organizations. I think, what do you think of the options was like the closest to, a potential? I mean, that might be difficult to explain, but.
No, I think Gordon would agree with this. I think the ADU concept would work really well if we could.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I think that a housing trust fund was a real,
That was the big one.
not just a possibility, but a probability. If the sale had gone through and the cash was there, I got the sense the select board was behind at least some portion of money going towards that trust fund.
Right.
And then from that trust fund, there might be a program for ADs
Right.
or other things like that. So yeah, that's where I thought we were headed. And we may still be.
Right.
And we did, by the way, collect a series of trust documents from other Montpelier and other places. And we came up with a draft just for at least discussion purposes.
Right.
It obviously would need to be worked on, but so that people would start thinking about it. And, we had made some good strides towards that.
And the Woodstock, I think it's the Woodstock Downtown Development Corporation or something like that, or some acronym of that. So I could equate this to maybe like the Downtown Bennington Alliance. Are they a separate nonprofit, do you remember? Or is it part of an organization within the community or within the town's municipality?
So the Housing Work Group comes out of the Economic Development Commission.
EDC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is part of the town. Right, as far as I know. I mean, I didn't ask to define whether it was a town but it's an interesting reporting structure because they do still report to the Economic Development Commission, not necessarily their select board, about what they're doing in the projects. And then, of course, the Economic Development Commission comes to before the select board in the town for things. So that's my understanding anyway.
Now, do we have any kind of a budget in our committee?
No.
Could we have one?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question because the person who, I forget if it was John or whomever who mentioned about the November 14th forum that's going on, I went on and I checked and I was like, oh, that's $180 to go. And if that's something that a few members of this task force wanted to go to, I don't think that should be an expense that would come out of our own personal
Any of
pocket.
these kinds of.
Right, any of these kind of things that may come up that are really important
to the group,
to
yeah.
our work. So.
There's also this group called Community Workshop, who works with other Vermont agents, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
And they do strategic planning, they do, housing, all kinds of different services that if they were to be considered as someone we would hire to help us do this big project.
Yeah, I think I was certainly thinking of that when I was looking at the the cost of this, of the meeting. I think, the benefits in hearing all of the different groups that are working throughout the state on this issue is certainly very beneficial. I mean, certainly for you, but I think for all of us at various levels. So I would like to add that I think I would like to agree with you that, Jen, obviously I sat in on a lot of the housing task force meetings towards the end of the previous one, but as I've stated, for me, one of the pieces I think that was also kind of the glue in a lot of that, especially in the Woodstock plan, was that part-time person. Yep. Whether or not that's something we would consider or suggest, I think that's up for debate, but I think that person having the ability to maneuver people around different, because the DHIP program in particular can be a little bit cumbersome and difficult to understand, and by saying, hey, your property, if you just did this, it would potentially, this is why you're not, and get you through the process instead of just getting a hard no. So
there's also, you were talking about funding, but there's the Vermont Community Foundation, what is it called? So with Elizabeth Marks. So there's small grants there.
Yeah.
To look
We could
at as
apply
well.
for a planning grant or something
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
they have,
Yeah.
small grants that you could get to maybe hire someone
is that
in a
the
position.
Vermont Community Foundation.
foundation, not the fund, right?
Foundation.
Yeah,
Who puts on this?
VHFA,
What's
Vermont
that?
Housing Finance.
And they're the ones putting on the meeting that's next
In
month,
November, yeah.
I mean, you would think, and I'm just asking the question, I mean, if the state of Vermont and towns are so looking for housing, you would think that the state would kick in money to Vermont Housing, and anybody that is on one of these committees would be able to go for free.
Well, it
That's
does
what-
say that if you're an elected official,
if
you
you're
can go for free.
If you're, so I actually emailed them for clarification because it actually specifies legislator or event participant or speaker, meaning
Right.
if you're providing
Yeah, speaker
something to
there.
it.
There's also scholarships.
Yeah,
I
they do
just
have
wanna say
scholarships.
one thing here.
Yeah.
Because, this 1989 study,
Yeah, I was getting,
Manchester Action Plan, Town of Manchester, and in some ways, this sums up a lot, and I'm not
Yeah.
gonna read the whole thing,
Please.
but 2 sentences. The optimal answer or answers for Manchester will ultimately lie in the degree to which the town is willing to use its resources and/or authority to reduce housing costs. The decision of how far the town is willing to go lies at the heart of this plan. And the towns you're talking about, Woodstock or Wilmington or these places, they devote a certain percentage or all of their local option tax towards economic development or housing or something. Manchester has chosen not to do that.
do we
That's
have
not anything that we have authority to change. That would be the select board, and the town would have to deal with that. So if we can get a trust fund, then we can do a lot. But at some point, if the town is, one of the frustrations I think we had in the last housing task force is we had no authority, we had no money, we were just talking. We might as well have just been people sitting around in a bar over a beer talking about housing.
Right.
Because nothing could get accomplished.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well, I know
so-
other
What's the
committees have
difference, let me
budgets.
just say, what's the difference of this task force and that task force? Somebody clarify that for me?
Well, I think having actual select board members on the task force and planning, DRB on the task force,
But it's-
those are things we didn't have. I mean, it's great representatives, but not anyone that represented the town specifically, other than Gordon. Gordon really was in the heart, very
Okay.
difficult.
I just wanted a clarification of what was
The
the
task
difference.
force, when you were discussing the options task force, how far did that get in? Was there anything within the task force that was discussed? I'm just curious to see.
You mean what we thought?
Well, yeah, I mean, was there a thought process from the task force as to
Well,
maybe
no.
we'll look at this, or maybe we'll consider presenting this to the select board?
Well, I think that because of the fact that that sale was almost, I'm gonna say guaranteed to happen.
Right.
When we started getting down to this housing trust fund option, we were really excited about that because we thought, wow, this is gonna do it for us. This is really gonna set us off in the right direction. But once that fell apart,
Okay.
lots of other things kind of quickly fell apart, and then the housing task force was disbanded. So we never got to the point of really getting into discussions about, well, what other alternatives do we have to try to raise funds to do this?
Bill, are you saying you actually proposed to the select board to do a local options tax?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
No, there was no proposal to take a portion of that.
Right.
Right, because the other thing to keep in mind is that with the local option taxes that are already being assessed, they are also, I believe, capped at 1%. They cannot be greater than 1%. So we already have a room and meals, and we already have sales. So
They are getting money from those things?
Yes.
But that money is earmarked for other things, is what?
Correct.
correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, is it possible to take money that's earmarked for, and hear me out, I have a crazy idea for all of this, I thought about this all week, 2 weeks. What if we took some of the town land that had sewer going to it, okay? We took some of the local options tax money, and we bought a prefab house, and we put it on that land. The town did. Then sold the house, took the money, and built another house next to it. Sold that house, and then just kept repeating as many as we can get on that land that sewer could handle, and just to get houses built. And then the money would return to the town. It wouldn't be like gone on a project, we never see it again. It would return to the town, and it would be, because we can buy prefabs, I've looked into it, for $120,000 for a 3-bedroom prefab. And you put it on the land, $175,000, and you can sell it and then do another one. And that's the price, we're trying to hit, for a 3-bedroom, that it's affordable, and we could build a ton of these things.
When you say
Just remember
prefab,
that-
is it it's not the model home?
It's
not
a modular home.
It's a modular home, okay. Not the,
Well, it's prefab, like it's
like
not walls flat packed, but it's halves put together
yes,
on a foundation.
like Westchester housing.
Yeah, I
is
was
that-
looking at Commodore, but yeah.
Yeah,
it's,
like
you know,
yeah.
prices are affordable.
I think we should go
I'm
that
just gonna point out that local option tax right now reduces everybody's property taxes. And when you start taking money away from that, property taxes go up. And right now, I'm gonna suggest that might be a difficult
Yeah.
atmosphere to get that done.
But the money would go back to it though.
Real quick though, on the same, I see what you're saying, I've kind of got a little bit of the same idea, because the town does have property that could be
Yep.
developed on. But on the same token, I don't think the town of Manchester should be in the development business, I don't think that's, but again, maybe there's other ideas, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. My opinion is they probably shouldn't. But if there was a developer out there that could develop the property, and maybe the property was little or no cost for the property, if you put your house, every house you put on that lot, if it's in the 175 range, whatever the range is when it's sold, that's actually gonna add to your tax base. So every house you sell at 175, if you sell 10 houses, 1.7, whatever, that's gonna get added to your tax base. So in the whole scheme of things, the town is going to get money
Right.
from the taxes on that. So I think that would be a better route to go, just my opinion. But rather than the town trying to develop it on their own and try to be in the real estate business, selling houses, dealing with the contractors, because the modular homes they're modular.
My idea is a little bit more complex than that. I actually would want the town to set the land as a land trust and put in prerequisites so they couldn't become a SDR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And so the land is not owned by the person who owns the house, but their house is on it. And there's just stipulations for having their house on that land, and that stipulations preclude them from making it a short-term rental.
Yeah.
Or flipping it and making.
Or flipping it and
Yeah,
making money.
that-
Yes,
So you
exactly.
get
It
some
has to be-
covenants on it. you
So
know?
the only thing was, a question on that, though, was if the town did do something like that, say the town did donate a piece of property or whatever to do a project like this, do we, or I don't know enough about the legal end of it, but is there any way that we could make sure that the town of Manchester residences would be benefiting from it somehow, whether it's, you'd have to be a requirement that you're a Manchester resident to purchase it, or I don't know what you'd come up with.
Similar to.
Or work in
like
the town.
Housing task.
Or work in the house, but I'd hate to see the town create unaffordable development and have, not to say it's bad, but someone from another town or another state come in and reap off the benefits that the taxpayers of Manchester paid for.
But like I said, the taxpayers would be loaning the money for the build, and they receive that money back. It wouldn't be money that disappears and is taken from the taxpayers. It's just a.
I just think, my concern is that you raise the infrastructure component, but, that's a big piece of it. So to extend that
Yeah.
stuff there's gonna be an initial outlay.
There is initial outlay.
And it's gonna be significant.
So let me just pull back in for a second so we can, because our focus on this one in particular was just reviewing the previous initiatives. So this is all, I think, discussion for the next point, but I wanted to piggyback off of what Gordon said, if I can find it again. Just in general, the 1989 document, and I think this is coming very clear that the same tones, the same theories, the same ideas, the same initiatives that were suggestions almost 40 years ago were certainly the same. Like, for instance, recommendations include adopting accessory apartment bylaws, so ADUs, which is obviously part of our discussion right now, reviewing the zoning districts, considering inclusionary zoning, and allowing mixed commercial and residential uses in specific areas to create more housing options. These are all discussions that have come up over the years. They were developing in the same three structures: the downtown, the village, and they call it the countryside, right? Like, those were the three designations, and it meant keeping the vibrancy of the downtown, developing more feasible communities within the town, places like Hillvale, places like Green Mountain Estates that have a sense of community structure, but then also maintaining the beauty of the outlying areas. Just quickly, rental prices have risen sharply, right? This is 1989. Second home market is skewing local housing prices, leading to fewer housing options for permanent residents. Same stories we're having today. The town's workforce is struggling to live in Manchester due to high housing costs, resulting in labor shortages. So all of these things are discussions. This original plan that you have that I forwarded to everyone, and Gordon has the paper copy, was part of, it was included, I believe, in the town plan, or as they called it, Bill, you might know this more than me, but the comprehensive plan, which is, I believe, is what they called it at that point. So this has been part of this dialogue for decades. The work that was done that Chrissy brought in last week that they discussed was stuff that was included in the updates in 2017. And obviously we all know that we are in the midst of planning or preparing for changes for our upcoming town plan. So I just wanted to kind of encompass all of those discussions, that the work that has been done in the past are things that we can now take and find ways to efficiently. So Cindy, you asked the question, what's the difference between the last housing task force and this one? I think my answer to that is absolutely. We have a representation of folks from across our town operation, right? We have representatives from our select board, our DRB, the DAB, Planning Commission. We also have nonprofit and private sector, and we've got a lot of different folks all coming together for this one common cause. So I think if we're able to take all of those pieces that we've learned over the years, that have been part of our general discussion and find ways to implement, bolster, get them out, like to dot the i's and cross the t's essentially on some of these things.
When did, that was 89, you said that?
Yeah.
When did the school tax come in? That was before, just before 89, right?
No,
After.
that was
Was it after
after.
89?
Yeah, so Act 60 was in, Act 60 was in 97 or 98, I think it was, or around that time. Because I was still in elementary school at that point. So I was at MEMS when I think it had just started.
So I think the school tax, I mean, when you're talking about high rents, the school tax, the high school tax, I think, because taxes used to be a lot lower, now they're a lot higher. If someone's renting a house out, they have to figure their taxes into the.
Part of the operating cost.
Part of the operating cost. So if your operating costs are higher, everything is, obviously electric, fuel,
Yeah.
everything's higher.
I would
But
say
if-
though that if you looked at the the scale, that there's a trajectory looking at like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there was a much greater jump in towards the late 80s. And if you also think about the change in dynamic here, I believe, I mean, I wasn't alive in the 70s, but the change in commercialness of Manchester
Right.
obviously changed quite a bit in starting into the late 80s. I think the Crystal Palace was built in the early 90s, late 80s, so around that time.
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah.
80s.
So around that time was when the face of Manchester in terms of its economic footprint was changing, right? So, and just to put some things into perspective, we've discussed how many units we would need of housing, right? What is the number that we would need to get us in the right area? And I think looking at the state's numbers, and I know you can't necessarily back directly into Manchester, but if you just looked at a percentage of the number of homes that are in Manchester over the entire percentage, we would be, in the hundreds of units that we would need to maintain or get to where we were in a positive situation for housing. In 1989, the town was expecting to require 130 units of affordable housing to meet the needs of family, elderly residents, and single renters. And in the actual descriptions, it describes the housing developments that are in Manchester. And let's just look at the larger projects that have existed, right? In 1989, when this report was done, that included Haynes Manor, Bournebrook. It included
In which one?
it included the meadows and the fields.
Spruce Street.
It included Spruce Street. The only project that it did not include was Torrey Knoll. So in the time frame of since 1989, looking at larger projects, not infill projects or anything like that, Torrey Knoll was the only affordable housing project that has made any sort of a change in that number. And the required housing number has increased significantly. So I would like to move on to talk about, now that we've heard kind of all of the pieces that have led up to this, what our immediate goals are for this task force. And I think I've said already that I think it's important that we capitalize on the work that we've done, that groups have done for decades, find ways to make those things become reality as much as possible. Think outside the box, use our different angles from nonprofit to, our individual connections within the community, public and private, nonprofit. I've already said that, but you get the picture. Like any ways that we can find ways to get these things off of the drawing board, off of a piece of paper and into reality, I think is our overall arching focus.
So just for some clarity again, I'm going to push this envelope a little bit. So we have select various government boards represented here, okay? Are we as a task force thinking that we are going to be able to make presentations to the various boards? Or are you guys going to be taking back from it?
I take back what we talk about here at our meetings. I have already done that.
Okay,
at
cool.
different meetings.
Yeah.
Discussed what we're discussing.
So,
That's,
yes.
that's
I
the
do the
connection I'm
same thing
missing.
with our board.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
thank you.
I think in general, the great thing of efficiency is that we have members that can, have experience.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, I'm new to the select board, but we can all discuss these things, have some sort of a piece of the discussion back in our individual groups.
Great.
Now, one of the things I think you mentioned, Leon, was taking back the idea of putting a limit on short-term rentals or
You heard
registering
that in
them.
the last meeting? And
Well, somebody said, I think,
That was in the last planning commission meeting, I talked about that.
yeah,
But
and what do they think?
I wanted to make a registry that we could put a cap on how many we issue per year. So we only have a registry, but we only have a certain amount we can have in town. There's a cap. If you don't get a license from us, then you can't do it.
And that-
But also wanted to, there's a couple of things I was talking about, was also making it so certain zones that are mixed use would be allowed, but if it's a residential, like R10, no, because those are they're not business zones. And really what SDRs are is they're small inns, they're little mini hotels, and they operate like hotels. They just skirt a lot of the regulations that hotels have to go through. But they're still doing the same thing and making the same money. And they should be treated as a business. And so since those areas, residential R10s are residential non-business areas, they should be excluded from those areas.
So how did they take that idea?
They're looking into it.
Okay.
So Cindy,
Under duress.
yeah. Cindy, to answer your question a little bit further, I think that first of all, we have a fiduciary role to report to the select board on at least quarterly basis.
Okay, thank you.
We have the dialogues between each of our respective committees. But in addition, I think one of the pieces that's at least a more long-term or short long-term goal is that we need to collectively as a group make recommendations for the Planning Commission on ways to improve the housing situation in Manchester, whether it's to the Planning Commission or bringing efforts particularly to the Select Board for whatever reason, but absolutely making recommendations based on our research, our data, everything that we have, so that they can take that and go with it.
Okay. I just witnessed what the other committee was doing, and I knew that there was frustration of not being heard, so, thank you.
What's the current status of the sewer, the infrastructure improvements? I mean, is there any conversation at this stage on Richfield Road, or not? Is that?
Yeah, it's actually on the agenda for the next select board meeting.
It is, okay.
So,
Because that really should help guide us to anything down Airport Road and so forth. I mean, there's no point just having those conversations if the infrastructure really isn't going to be there.
Well, I've been talking to Chrissy
Yeah.
about it, and the thought was maybe because there is water and sewer up to the airport now, it's just a matter of where it goes right now. It goes to the pump station, and they're trying to figure out a way of how many houses could conceivably within the next year or two add on to that system without taxing that system until down the road they decide to do the whole new system.
To be clear though, it's not Airport Road. You're
No,
talking
no.
about it going up
Natural form way, yes,
And it only goes up to the former Hayes hangar house.
yes,
Because he's the one who built
right.
the system. So to get access, as Tim is talking about, over to the airport, perhaps you could go across the airport itself,
Right.
landing strip.
Yeah.
or go up Airport Road would be, there's water that goes up Airport Road, but no sewer.
I don't think it's big enough water.
But it's not a big enough water line.
Yeah, it's gotta be, I think it's gotta be 8 inch for the fire department.
But they're looking into all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is, so Chrissy is making a presentation on next Tuesday's select board meeting. I'm trying to find the agenda, just to double check here. So the town engineer, Chrissy Haskins of Dufresne Group, to present a preliminary engineering report for a possible sewer extension on Richville Road. So that is coming. So it's very timely, actually.
And actually, I've been talking to one person in particular about one of the buildings in town that has an upstairs in it that's not being used at all. And they're talking about possibly putting some apartments up there. The question I've got is, I've been talking to a few developers about all these different projects and whatever, but their question is the grants and what might be available.
Yep.
And I didn't know if anybody from our board here or anybody could put a packet together, somehow just put a packet together so I could hand them out to the developer. I mean, I know it might be on our website or whatever, but if I could have a packet when I meet with someone, here you go, this is what's available.
Well, I put a spreadsheet together. It's not complete, but things that I have found, either federal or state, based on our designations for one here in Manchester, neighborhood exemptions that we have. So there's money out there for certain situations where you have to have the sewer, or you could have a priority project that has sewer within a half mile of the designated
Right,
area.
but just-
So these things are all out there.
They're out there, but if there's any way
Yeah.
I could get from someone just a packet, 3 or 4 sheets of paper, this is who you call, this is what you do.
Well,
I would-
the ADU pamphlet actually initially probably still has it, I guess. I haven't changed.
But that's the ADU.
Right.
It is, but there was a whole list of various resources.
Correct.
That some are for additional things as well.
Yeah.
The way that got left, though, the reason it didn't get published very broadly was because I think Kathleen was checking on some of those links and updating some stuff. So we do need to do that.
Right.
But we hand it.
But yeah, I know, you and I talked about this, and I think that, well, so in talking about immediate goals for the current task force, I think the number one thing is understanding or developing a central resource for materials. And we've already tried to do that for us, right, so that we have everything put together. But finding and putting together clear, straightforward as possible documents that, we're a pretty small town, so it wouldn't necessarily mean that, this sheet of 3 pieces of paper might qualify for you. I think we discussed at one point that based on your zoning district, or if you're in town center or whatnot, here's one for you, here's your potentials. So I think getting those things down so that, especially folks like you who are, fixing people's toilets, when you're seeing these properties the property that you're discussing, that's a potential for a very central location in our community, and could be a net positive. So you can see that's like literally at the top of my list, is developing a centralized resource for our materials.
But I think we also have to concentrate on the priority projects that allow us this exemption. So you can talk about the airport road and all, but the things we can take advantage of immediately are these priority housing projects that they call them.
Which is what?
And those are projects on land or wherever, or refurbishing places that are in our designated neighborhood area, which is pretty much areas that have the water and sewer. So those are the spots where you get a lot of exemptions and funding. There's funding out here to get these projects underway. That's what they want. They want these projects to get started because you have a certain window of time to get them done, or to get them started anyway. So for example, January 2027 is the start is when they have to be in the process of being developed. So in those areas, is where we should concentrate, I think, to get the housing funding and the housing exemptions that we could take advantage of.
So,
So I've put these things out there on the, I don't know if they're in my drive, but I can put them out there. And I have a spreadsheet that I've been putting
Yeah.
together based on
So-
federal money and the state funding for these different projects.
so what I would like to propose is, and this is kind of going to the next part as well. I don't know if any of you got a chance to see the select board meeting. Carl made a presentation to the select board, and as part of a grant that they received from the MERP funding, or MERP grant, they used that to actually create a website for all the housing, the energy projects / resource links / meetings, events, everything that the community can kind of coalesce around, go to as a one-stop resource. I think if we can work on figuring out exactly what we need to put in a document or a set of documents, and like, here's how to get started, or here are your current opportunities, these are priority. These are the ones that if you are in the village designation, and here's your map, you have an even greater sense of urgency to do some of these, because you may be exempt from certain Act 250, which wouldn't apply anyway in most of the town center. But if it was outside of the town center by 100 feet, those would be potential that could get an exemption that in 3 years may not be available, which would take the project even longer to get off the ground. My thought is let's pull together our documents. Let's come up with some, what do you think? Should we focus it on a particular area? Based on your priority, like here's...
Where there is town sewer and town water,
Yeah.
obviously that's easiest.
Yes.
And that's
Because
the
that takes
quickest.
the less.
And it's the quickest.
And it's the quickest, takes the least amount of permitting process, because if you gotta go through to get your sewer and
Environmental,
water.
yeah.
I do raise the question, though, is do we have the proper designation in our town plans for the designated neighborhood districts that you referred to? Is that in place? I'm not sure.
Yes,
Because we were looking at some grants last couple of years, and it needed to be expanded. Right now, we have the downtown area.
we do have the neighborhood designation from the state. You're
Right.
asking whether it's in the town documents? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it has to be officially adopted and designated by, it's not automatic just because you
Yeah.
have.
Well, right now, we're working on a new town plan. The
Yeah.
planning commission is deep in working on that. And so we can put into that whatever we want.
I
to
suggest that you just do that independently. That whatever is needed to facilitate housing, get under less regulation, and make you more available for outside funding, just do it.
If it's in the zoning ordinance, I think it's my understanding the zoning ordinance is how the town governs. The town plan is not really an ordinance, it's just it's an idea, it's a
Right.
thought. So I don't know, I think like Bill says, I don't think it has to go, it could or could not be in the town plan, but I think if it gets changed in the zoning ordinance, I think that's the easiest thing.
So Gordon, you had something. I would say that I have seen it actually listed, the village designation, and in not talking about the town of, not the village of Manchester. The village designation, the village center is listed on the state's website as a recognized village center.
That's right. I know that Janet,
Yeah, remember
a few
Jim?
years ago, was trying to expand that
Right.
neighborhood.
Right.
And I recall that she went, I wasn't there, but I know that she went to the MBA and was trying to pitch that to the business owners to expand it kind of up Main Street is what I remember. And I
But there was other limitations at the time.
Exactly.
I think the legislature now has relaxed some of that.
Yeah, I think there were some reasons why that the business owners
Right.
weren't crazy about that, but that may have changed. And I know enough to be dangerous, as they say, but I do recall those conversations.
So I mean, again, I think we
So-
can do, there's quite a few pieces of documentation that we, or resource centralization that we can do. I think one is, how can you take advantage, especially for those in our village designation that may be available for exemptions, a document that outlines resources, that here are the different opportunities, here are the people to call, you know, here are our resources, we're willing to work and thread the needle and discuss options with you. I think the second is, in general, is taking the ADU pamphlet and revamping / revitalizing / finishing it and getting it back out there. I think it's also putting these together in a clear way that they're accessible on our town's website or through some other resource. But I think getting those ready as soon as possible, given the fact that if there is a 3-year exemption and we've got 3 years, we know these things can take a while, so we need to get on it as quickly as possible.
Yep,
Right?
I'd
see.
also like to have have the board recommend to the planning commission to revisit the rural agriculture designation. That changed from a 2-acre zoning to 10-acre zoning not that many years ago. And the consequence is that people there's one developer right now who wants to build some houses on a 6.8-acre lot. He would like to build 3 houses, 2 acres apiece. 10 years ago, it would have been totally fine. Now, you can't do it. Not without a lot of problems. You could be super creative and maybe they would approve a PUD and maybe you could do a variety of things, but it's much more difficult. And sometimes that rural agricultural section on the map just doesn't make sense. Kind of wedged between other developments that are all 2 acres. And why is it 10 acres there? I mean, so revisiting some of those would be helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a guy who would be building tomorrow, and yet this 10-acre zoning
I think
is a problem.
I think some of the talk around that was to do with protecting what farmland we have, in a sense, not to have too much sprawl development on the edges of town. Try to keep most of the new development closer to the core of town.
Oh, I have no doubt that was the purpose.
Yeah.
But it also is a little bit, it stops the person who could afford a house. Because only a developer can build on a 10-acre parcel. I mean, it's too expensive to buy that land. And so you're making it more difficult for people to build houses.
And the problem with that is you can, in the way that works, you could put more houses on a smaller lot, less than 10 acres. But the problem there is that you end up with probably community wells and community sewers because of the separation between the septic and the well shield. So it almost makes it impossible for someone, on a 10-acre lot, and you could build, you know, maybe 4 or 5 houses in there, but they'd have to be clustered right together.
Because of
And all the rest has to be open and undevelopable, and you're not allowed to put anything on it. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's, in my mind, it doesn't work, as
No,
knowing the.
So the point is just to encourage the planning commission to take a look at it. We don't have any authority to do anything, but I.
And it's kind of the same with ADUs too. If you want to put an ADU out of town where there is not water and sewer, that's almost impossible. Because most septic systems are designed for the house that you have on the site. And if you want to add another bedroom, bathroom to that house, whether it's a separate building or whatever, you got to go back to the state, get the septic re-engineered, make sure you got plenty of water.
And it's all.
Basically, the same thing happened at Willow Pond.
Yeah.
We approved the project up there, ready to go. And the states came in and said, well, your well's not right, so they had to drill another well. And they decided, whatever the reason was, but, I mean, that was a perfect project for
Oh, yeah.
housing, they just went down the tubes because of the regulations. And if we make it too tough to do it, like if we want to have ADUs, but you can't have it unless it's in town, then, you know, I think it just makes it too tough.
And I'm wondering if it's a good place to start is where Joanne has already kind of started doing what she says is understanding understanding what the designations are called for to be entitled to anything. To me, that's, you know, we can go ahead and call this and that, but let's follow the path that she's already creating, and that's putting together a list of the various designations so we can establish that and then go from there.
Right.
Because, I mean, we need to understand what the designations are. If it's a matter of simply moving it to DRB, to Development Review Board, you know, and trying to bypass so-called zoning, you know, changes within the planning commission, that might be the simpler way. But I think if you have a spreadsheet put together on the designation, let's take a look at that and kind of cross-reference it with what the existing planning and zoning regs are. To me, that makes the most sense.
And the zoning has already been updated, right, last spring?
Well, it's been updated multiple times over the past couple of years.
For these new
Zoning is not
exemptions.
the problem.
No, I don't think it is.
Well, they had to update them to.
No, I think the only
They
problem
did.
could be, Bill, is just the
Because-
designation of the zoning. I agree with you. I don't think zoning is the problem, but if we can clarify the designations to fall in line with the current zoning,
Yeah.
then we got something to start
Right.
with for money.
I wanted to just put this out there. While you were talking about the RA, and I don't want to go back to this, this came from the 1989 plan, and this is these were their 11 key areas for action, right? This is kind of the summation of all of this document. And this is an interesting, number 5 on this list is examine inheritance lots or back lots as a way to give today's owners one chance at creating a smaller lot for outlying areas. Meaning, okay, you inherited, you at one point could subdivide your R10, which is now R10, into 4, whatever, however many lots. And the new zoning states that it can no longer be a one-time exemption. I'm not advocating or anything. I just thought it was interesting that this was literally something that was talked about 40 years ago because they were looking at how zoning changes were going to affect farmland, for instance. So I think that's I think that's an interesting piece to just to put into the mix.
Just real quick to piggyback on. So as Joanne was saying, that if you go to the state of Vermont Municipal Planning Data Center, we are 2 designations. The
Right.
Neighborhood Development Area, we are there as well as a village center.
Right.
So those are our designations already. I don't think we'd be on the
But where are
state.
the boundaries, John?
That I don't know.
Well-
Someone's
That's exactly it.
it's gotta be out there somewhere.
And there is.
If you look at the map,
Yep, and-
I don't know how to use that map very well, but
Yep.
there is a map.
So I think,
that
but that's the
gives you
thing.
the
We need to
boundaries.
find these ways. We need to make it as user-friendly as possible so that, we can take our
can
existing
look up-
plot map and
Yeah.
put these overlays over them. I know that they have it because we just asked about something for a property
Yeah.
on Ways Lane, and, the blue literally ends right next to their
Yeah.
lot, right?
And then the yellow is where it was, and
Yeah.
the end was right here.
So so obviously that's the exact same place, John, that Joanne and I had seen it. So let's get those maps. Let's try to come up with a generalized parcel map that clearly outlines so that we know exactly what we're working with. I have also asked, and I know you've probably worked with Eric a little bit, but just in general, understanding a little bit more about what we have in the ground. Because I've asked a couple times, like, well, does it stop here or does it stop there? And there's like Eric knows. So I think understanding those pieces are really very important for our general
So
plans.
You can go, there's a laser on the
Is it?
public parcel map
yeah,
that shows the water and sewer area. That does not mean that those houses all have water and
Correct.
sewer. Sometimes it's, well, this road is within the area, but nobody is hooked up. and you'd have to run a line up the road to get people to hook up, but they could,
Yeah,
Yeah,
if they all pitched in and paid for it.
so.
yeah,
I
so
mean,
you do
can-
have to get an opinion from the jurisdictional opinion about a particular plot of land
Right, and again,
to be sure that is, before you go any further with it, you've got to get that written jurisdiction opinion to say, yeah,
On this-
you're good to go. That's within the parameters that you can get the funding and you can get the
Right.
exemptions. So,
on the same token that we should have, and I'll work on that with Eric, maybe he could give me a list of areas in town that have sewer, but again, there might be certain areas that have it, but they're already maxed out. Or close to maxed out, so you gotta be, I don't know, I mean, I don't know.
I
How it
think they
works,
do
but-
the capacity based on my last experiences, here's what we have for capacity as a town, and you make your application for X gallons, and I don't think it's determined by the lines in any one area.
Well, it could be, depend on the size of the line. I mean, you can't have a,
Running up and down public streets, that's not an issue.
no, but I mean,
Some private areas, it might be.
so if you're going out, you've only got a 4-inch line, you need an 8-inch line.
Right,
I don't know.
But I think everything in the public way is adequate today,
You're sure?
yes.
Okay.
I'll ask you.
I'll bet on it.
So what I would recommend is that we solidify maps and we solidify the designations, which it sounds like, I mean, it's documented to the state, but let's solidify that, let's lock it in. And when we come back to our next meeting, we will have that like definitively. And then let's just discuss, I mean, we can discuss it offline or whatever, what it is you kind of want to see in something that you can hand to someone when you're out. I mean, anyone else has ideas about what would be beneficial for a pamphlets that we have all the content, and then putting something together in graphic form is not,
now,
it's just the content that's the most difficult part.
are these people that are going to build from scratch, new housing, or
Both.
refurbish places?
Yep, new
Because there's
development
different
and
funding for different,
existing buildings.
to convert them
converting
to,
space, open space in the building to
yeah.
apartments.
This would be similar to
But at
what,
what price point are they willing to build that?
Well, we have to go modular.
Well, if you're building, it's got to be something
Yeah.
that's pre-made. You're not going to stick build anything.
Yeah.
I think,
Well,
Affordable.
I priced my housing for modular,
yeah.
I'm doing it cheap.
How much a square
Really?
foot? Is it okay to
Modular?
ask, or is that not?
I'm under 350, all in.
Yeah, but I think what we thought there, Bill, was that 350 was still more than the median range.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Square foot, he's talking about 350 a square foot, I understand, but I think what we established was the 350 a square foot was beyond that affordable. I understand what you're saying.
If you want to give me 10 minutes, I'll give you some of the headwinds that
I'd
you
love
really
that.
are up against.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
so
Maybe.
1 second. Let
Business
me go through a couple more things. I would like us to come back with, I mean, in the plan, I think, I see us as potentially, as Bill, you have outlined, we are going to be driving the potential ideas and focus for any potential changes that are required for the upcoming town plan. Meaning, like, it's not going to be us that's going to be changing the town plan, but it's us that's going to say, for housing, as this group that is surmising across the board, folks, that has taken information from 40 years, if not more, of data, right? These are the things that we believe that need to change in our town plan to give us the direction as a community that this is where we want to go. As you stated, find the roadblocks, make those recommendations that are part of the Planning Commission's focus.
And can I add, we need to do it soon, because the
Yes.
town plan is due by March, I believe.
Yeah.
We have to turn it in, so
Right.
we have to get that done soon.
So if we are able to develop the materials, if we're able to come together and build set what, sorry, let me rephrase. Provide detailed recommendations on the most glaringly obvious issues that can help us alleviate housing issues. Those need to be to the Planning Commission immediately, because think about also with public notice and everything, we're backs against the wall already, right? I think we also need to figure out ways to plan and communicate this information outward, right? Because obviously our meetings are not well attended, but it's not just going to be incumbent on us sitting here and talking and then taking it back to our respective corners. We have to figure out ways to create that buy-in in our community. So I think those are really the pieces that I see as the kind of the immediate pillars. I think building, I mean, you've talked to me about tons of private enterprises that are working on plans, and how can we better support them? Find ways that, you know, is it through helping them find grant money? Is it helping them through the permitting process? What are those things? And continuing to be the sounding board for those private entities. That
I mean, I could talk to people about what might look good, but I really can't talk because of my position.
Absolutely.
I can't talk to them about the project, and I just refer them to Peter
Sure.
or Elias. But what would help me and I know one of the things, maybe working groups,
Yep.
which is on the agenda, if there's a way sooner rather than later, I could get the information from whoever's going to be on maybe the financial, that end of the board, of our board, sooner rather than the next meeting, you know, then I could start tomorrow if I had the information, you know. But I'm just,
Okay.
don't mean to push you, but.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, there's some nice charts here which we can,
Yeah.
if we're gonna put them out there on a web page,
Yeah.
or you can
Okay.
go to the shared documents in here as well, but
So
we don't
let's,
go in there.
If I had something we could just, again,
He likes
Hard copy?
I'm kind of tough
Hard
with
copy?
computers, I'm not a computer guy.
Oh, okay, so you want
But
a hard
If I
copy?
had a hard copy of just what is the best route for a developer or a person to go to for the incentives.
Yeah, and I would suggest we invite Katie Buckley to talk to us,
yeah,
because she knows all about the funding. She's pretty good about knowing what's available federally, statewide. She could give us a real good.
and she's from
Because I don't think
VLCT,
I'm
right?
probably not finding everything. I
No,
don't
where is she
know.
from?
League of Cities and
VLCT.
Towns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Where's she
she's
from?
pretty good.
Vermont
I'm
League of
sorry,
Cities and
it's turning my
Towns.
head to you. League of Cities and Towns.
I mean, maybe, do you know her, or you?
I've talked to her on the phone, but
I mean, if you knew her and she
We'll
could
work
get
on
me
it.
the information sooner, maybe she
Yeah.
could just send it to me.
Yeah, we'll get it together.
yeah.
But-
well,
You know, can I just get back to the March deadline? Is that March, just so I understand, Leon, are you saying that the planning is prepared to submit a new town plan?
Yes.
Next. Now, is there a reason why that has to happen in 2025? Could it
Yes, the
happen,
state-
could it happen in 2026?
The state requires that we make a new one every, like, 4 years.
With no extensions?
No extensions, it's gotta be, we have to come up with it, it has, the select board has, and the public meetings have to happen, and then the select board has to approve it, and then it's a whole big process.
So
And
there's a housing section in it.
So
It's gotta-
we're pretty much backed up against that, is that the,
We are, a planning commission.
well, it sounds like that, we all are.
Well, we are, but again, the plan is a vision, it's not,
Vision.
it's not
It's
law.
not
Yeah.
really
It's not
detailed.
law. So if you don't, our town plan's worked pretty good for a lot of years, I don't think we've had a major problem with it. I think
Well, except for housing.
except for housing. But if there's one certain item in it which might be housing is the major issue, maybe just focus on that.
Yeah.
Right.
Add that into our town plan, here's our new plan for 24, 4 more years, we'll work on it again.
Right.
I just don't think that, from what I've seen, you know, applications coming in and projects going on in town, I don't think we're going to hell. I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Do they already have a housing section in there?
I'm looking now
Okay,
for
because
it.
we could just.
There is, because the work that was
modify
done from Chrissy's
Okay.
group actually ended up being part of the town plan. Those initiatives were part of that town plan. But I think the discussion was that a lot of the stuff that had been discussed had not been brought to the front, right? The other stuff has taken a lot of the focus. So,
So do you want to take that up with them or to bring it to us and modify it, or how do you?
Well, I mean, I'd rather you guys give me what you want, and I will take it to them
Yeah.
and just get it done.
I think it's gonna need to
It
come
can't be a
from
lot of back
us.
and forth because we
Yeah.
don't have much time.
We don't have
So
it.
do you want to bring that to us next time? Or,
No, I think what I'll do is we'll make sure that in our next packet, the town plan's on the website. We'll make sure everyone has it in our folders.
the town plan?
The town
Yeah.
plan, we'll highlight the sections that are specifically on housing. But I think in general, based on the work that, the previous housing task force, the previous groups, are there areas of clear lack of focus or lack of inclusivity or whatever the pieces are that we need to include and make those recommendations sooner rather than later, knowing it's a plan. But hopefully there are certainly some folks in our community that will say, if it's not in the town plan, why are we focusing on it?
Yeah.
Right? So,
Is
Bill,
that something we could, is that
Yeah.
something we could, have within the next week? So at our next meeting, that might be number one on our agenda.
Oh, absolutely.
Number one on our agenda is we'll go through that.
Housing.
If that's,
I'm perfectly fine with
a major
that.
thing, let's get it out of the way. And then we can make the recommendation to from our board, what we think the planning board might or might not want to do.
Yep.
At least they'll have something black and white in their hand. We can give it to them and they can act
I'm
on
good
it.
with that.
Cool.
Bill, I want to give you a couple minutes to talk. I want to make sure that we get to our working groups before the end of the meeting. So do you just want can you do 5 minutes and we'll just give us your highlights of the things that you think are going to be the biggest headwinds from your perspective? Charlie too.
I got a quick succinct. I think, what you're talking about is, and pardon me if I don't use the right terms and maybe the most appropriate terms, but you're tweaking around the edges, okay? The town zoning is not an issue. We need to probably expand and increase density somewhere. And I'll just use my project as an example. I went through the town zoning and the town boards are most cooperative. A little bit of hassle from design review, but we worked that all out fairly quickly. Act 250 was an issue, but I think that's going to be diminished here in the future relative to housing, so I'll cross that one out. Then I started with a budget, okay? I'm going to put the numbers on there because it's designated as supposed to be workforce housing is somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000, okay? That was back in late 20 and 21 when I got my permit. And what happened? A couple of things. Energy standards, okay? I'm going to put that out there loud and clear. We've got competing interests. We got the drive to net zero and housing. And the drive to net zero, these energy standards are substantially increasing the cost of housing without physically adding anything to the housing, okay? The last 21 standards, anybody in the business will tell you it's added, because it changed the whole construction parameters, at least 15 on up to 20%, okay? Without changing anything. So I started at $400,000. What does 20% do to you? Do the math. Okay, now I'm at 480. Okay, but I'll give you 15%. I'm at 460. Okay, then the cost of construction has escalated the last 3 years by 25%. What does that do? Where does that leave you? Okay, so you're fighting cost is a major issue. And people's perception about what they lived in and what they can afford to today. So we have to say, how can we downsize and construct our housing today that people are willing to accept as desirable housing and make it affordable? And it's not easy. I was working with my architect. We got another set of energy standards that are on the table right now, okay, that would potentially increase us another 10%. Problem is with these standards, you have a curve. You get a diminishing returns, if you understand. And we're at the point where the last energy standards might save on the houses I'm building $500 a year on your heating bill, and it's going to take 80 to 100 years to recover it. So that's where we got these completing issues, and we got people that are focused in one direction, and we've got another people talking in another direction, affordability of housing, and we're not getting together. And we're going to have new standards on board that probably raise it another 10%. And they created a manual, which didn't exist now, is 150 pages long, and my architect says, no builder is going to take the time to go through this 150-page manual now on energy standards for residential housing. So these are some of the larger issues we've got to tackle in order to create it. So cost is your biggest headwind, okay? And so how do we at least stabilize the cost, and how do we how do we work the system as best we can to keep the costs down, okay? Talk about modular housing. I check into modular housing for what I'm doing, and I'm constructing letters in my modular housing. What you got to be careful when you throw numbers out there and you get a modular house on board, there's a lot more to finishing it up, what goes in it, and so on and so forth, and when you pencil it from beginning to end, it's not necessarily the cheapest way to do it, okay, or the most economical way. I'm not saying it's the only way, okay. Now, I have a problem with my housing and the way I build. I got 1,500 square feet to 1,800 square feet of livable space, okay, added a garage. Well, do you have to do that, okay? I've added porches, okay? Do I have to do that? I got a full basement, okay? And that's give or take, but you have to do frost walls and a floor, and so yeah, maybe I could trim 100,000 and dumb down the house that design review wouldn't approve, okay? Or those types of issues we have to wrestle with. We have to lower, I guess, our expectations as individuals on what we're going to live in the future.
Or reset, I think is a good word.
Reset.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, Bill, did you use a net zero builder?
Heck no.
No?
No, I'm meeting the current energy codes.
Okay. Because there's grant money out there for builders with net zero. Follow the net zero guidelines.
Yes, but by the time you go through some of this stuff and meet the codes, and go through it. Yeah, now they're offering grants, and tax breaks if you do geothermal and all those issues. But in talking with the architects, and I was on the school committee last year, people say stay away from it.
I've heard that.
Unless you're doing high-end building.
Even at that, a lot of developers will say that you get a $10,000 or $20,000 credit, but it costs you $60,000 to do it. So that's.
I'm working with, I'm into wood pellet heat, and so another firm I work with, we have to upgrade our electrical systems now in all existing houses to meet what we want to go, when we want to go all electric. Early houses, you had 100 amp service, right? Now you had a minimum of 200 amp service. Now they're talking, if you want to be the electrical house of the future, you have to have a 400 amp service. And the prices go up exponentially when you try to meet those requirements. So
There's a lot of headwinds out there now. I think we can beat them one by one. You know, I had to put my own infrastructure, even though I was on town water and sewer, technically. But I had to put my infrastructure in for my project. Okay, that's $70,000 before I put a shovel in the ground. Roadway, underground water and sewer, underground power. Well, you could do it overhead. No, it doesn't. But so what's that trade-off? Do you want to do that? And not counting the community center, that was another $20,000. But you start with that, and that's for a small plot of land. That's including a 8,000, 9,000 square foot plot of land, thanks to the new zoning, okay? So my density is not my issue, it's the cost. And I don't care, if you can even get it down to 250 a square foot times 1,500 square feet, where are you?
So Bill, if I understand it, then it seems to me as though a lot of the issues you're raising, this energy standards and so forth, is really more state. It has nothing to do with the local level.
That's right, but I think we got to raise our voice on these competing issues. I talked to the architects today, and you know, we have to, I think it's the Public Service Commission, it's in their hand. We've got to talk to our legislatures. You've got competing interests on this housing and so on. You know, Seth's all about Act 250. He's making Act 250 easier. That's good, but that does not solve the problem. It's costs. And it goes back to a lot of other issues. We have not valued our tradespeople sufficiently over the years, and now it's a workforce issue.
It's biting the hand that feeds you. Yeah.
But most talented people, needed people in the room are sitting right at this table now. You know?
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Thank
Bill. Well, I'm here to help, and I do have, I think most people are aware, I'm associated with a foundation that is willing to contribute some good seed money to encourage other people to contribute money, including the town. And I think the best way to do that is through a trust, a housing trust. And there are some good examples to neighbors. Look at the Wyndham Trust. Okay. And they just built a house over in Londonderry. Cindy Bell was involved in that. And even their dollars came out higher than they were hoping.
Yep.
You know?
you, Bill.
Champlain Valley.
Champlain Valley, yes.
Truck is,
Eric
you know,
Monty.
the other one that we just.
So let's try to talk about some working groups really quickly. I think obviously we discussed already the importance of the financial slash, I said funding arm. So I think that is a very important side of, or one sub-working group. I think naturally the other piece is just it's development slash resource, not resource, it's almost like prospecting, right? Which I know the previous group did. I mean, Gordon, you were calling folks about ADUs and whatnot, but I think, you know, the group that's dedicated on outreach, obviously resources and education and sustainability are all important. I mean, obviously we just talked about heat standards and whatnot, but are there any other areas or tweaks or anything to those? I'd say maybe 3 groups. Are there any other tweaks that you think or options that may be important?
I would just say that, you know, from our what you had mentioned earlier about the lack of public involvement at the moment, that you do have a group that's kind of committed to communications, marketing, PR, for whatever decisions are made, how do we get that out there to the general public if they're not going to attend these meetings, at least so that we know we're keeping them informed.
And in that vein, I would like to propose or look into that group workshop, what is it? Community workshop, and see if there is money to hire someone to help us do that sort of thing, outreach, plan meetings.
Okay.
And I don't know what their costs are. I could look
So I
into
think
it.
that's certainly that if, so I'm hearing, I think that the marketing and education is one of the most important pieces of this. As Bill was explaining, even the piece about understanding what is, and I know, Leon, you and I have had discussions, is that, what my parents, they live in a 1,200 square foot home. Do they need 1,200 square feet? No, because we've seen examples of 900 or 750 that are just fantastic for a senior couple. I have examples of folks in our community who, you've talked about your father, who probably will not move out of his home, but other folks who live in a 3-bedroom home, the only reason why they're hanging on to it, they would love to stay in Manchester, but there's nothing for them to move to, right? So shuffling the deck a little bit for folks. So we have funding/grant focus. We have a marketing and education and a development in buildings. Any change? No. I in my head, I kind of see where these would be going already. I think you want to do marketing and education.
That's what.
That was a joke. So I think. So let me just mark these out here. So let's just say development, funding, and marketing, and let's just call it education. I think that's the key element there. So I think, Joanne, funding that's your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Is it, like, are we going to separate into?
Yeah,
two or three
the
groups?
idea would be
With
to
two or
that.
three people,
Yeah,
or what?
ultimately, since we're a member of 7, a group of 3 is still acceptable.
Yes, who's hungry?
Who's that?
Not my kiddo. It's on Zoom. We have Jenny. I think that's Breen. Jenny Breen. Tim, you're on building, right?
That's.
I would like to be on the educational piece and marketing. Cindy, I think from your experience on the outreach, nonprofit sector, getting folks involved, community outreach, those types of things, I think marketing education would be a great spot, if that would be something that would be interested for you. I'm just
Yep.
making
No,
suggestions.
No, that's fine. Yep.
Um,
I didn't want to really go funding and financial because there's a conflict of interest.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Then, John, I think you also, for marketing and outreach,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, John Burnham. So then that leaves Dev. John Watanabe, where do you see yourself? Where do you,
I think the development builds.
Okay.
Maybe, I'm happy to kind of move around if
okay.
necessary.
And that's you too, Leon, right? Yeah. Okay. And then, Joanne, that leaves you by yourself.
That's okay.
No, I would like to be able to help all of, kind of tie the pieces together as much as
You're
possible.
pretty busy.
As well, John, is
Yeah.
that, or Jonathan, I don't know why I just called John.
It's a common name here.
I know it's a really common name. Is that, these subgroups could bring in other
Yes.
community leaders and members to their groups to help move this along.
Yeah.
So in Joanne's case,
Yeah.
if she's a person of one, bring in as many people as you need into your subgroup, and you're the leader of that group. And
Yeah,
go for
like
it.
Katie, I could
Yeah.
get in
absolutely.
with her and
Yeah.
get all the information out of her head,
Okay. I think that's a good start. And
So can you repeat who's
Sure.
on what teams?
I've got for the development or
When you say
outreach.
development,
So this is like reaching out to
reaching-
property owners, like finding
Outreach.
outreach.
And
That's
marketing, like?
No.
Outreach.
This is more like on a construction / development / building /
It's all encompassing.
Yeah.
Big deal, okay. So
That's
who's on that?
Tim Waker, John Watanabe, and Leon
Ward.
Ward, thank you. I was having a moment. It's been a long day.
That's
And then
outreach.
funding and grants is Joanne. Education and marketing is myself, John West, Cindy Luce, and John Burnham.
And Joanne, I'm happy to help you on the funding thing.
What's that? Oh.
Gordon will help you on funding.
I do most of the grant.
Oh, you do?
Stuff for the town. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think,
All right.
honestly, an initial idea of the revamp of this group is that there was going to be a large grant/funding element to it. An idea, because let's hope that we are able to get across the finish line and start to see progress, that this may be, like, take Woodstock. It's the downtown development, like it's the Christmas lighting and the underground things to improve the downtown core even more. So maybe those were things in our hopefully not too distant future.
Now, would this outreach include speaking with the owners of the current properties that
Yeah.
we might want
So
to develop?
that's in
Like
their group.
Crystal
Yeah.
Palace?
Crystal Palace, or other
Even the
commercial
depot?
properties or depot properties, which obviously is
Working on them.
working on it.
I'm already on them all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm working on some already, yep.
Yep, so there's a lot that he's already working on and others are, so there's a lot of potential.
Oh, so.
So
the
you gotta get your
301
stuff together.
So it's the those two nice buildings that are.
The three
for
buildings,
sale.
the 10
Well,
buildings.
The three, but,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, three. So you're working on that?
We're kind of trying to figure something out for that, yep.
Yep, so there's,
But again, if it.
And those are in the zone, so.
Yeah, again, if I had that packet, it would help me
Yep.
immensely.
so I'll help you work on getting it. We'll work
Not like I
together.
push it, but
Yeah.
tomorrow's fine.
So unless Jenny wants to say anything, the next thing is public comment. Is there anything else from us individually? The last piece I did want to talk about was the next meeting, and I know we discussed over email. I would like to stick to the October 17th date instead of the 24th for a multitude of reasons. There's also a BCRC, Bennington Regional Plan meeting at 4:30 on the 24th. So that would be almost in direct conflict with our meeting already. Plus, U.S. Senator Peter Welch will be in Bennington, so that's why I have a conflict there.
So, yeah, the 17th, did
The
everybody?
17th, and then.
17th is good, right?
17th, and I know based on the meeting that is going to be happening in November, which is the 14th, we could, move it to the next week, because Thanksgiving is the latest possible this year on the 28th. So that still gives us time.
21.
Be the 21, yeah.
So
So
take away, we're going to look at the plan for next week, right? The town plan?
we're going to have the town plan ready. We're going to split up into
Talk
groups.
about-
We're going to have at least a first draft of a documentation for handouts. Let's look at the ADU pamphlet as well. And I think all of us absolutely have to take a look at the town plan.
Can you drop that into the
Yes, well,
folder?
we'll absolutely put it in the Dropbox, and I'll make sure to highlight the sections that speak to housing in particular.
I'll see if I can find the maps that say, here's where the neighborhood, here's the
Yep.
village.
That was the
Yeah.
last piece, the maps and
I
documentation.
know that they're there in the other room, but I
Yep.
I don't know where they've been shoved.
Okay, let's get them all up front and,
And-
Too bad we couldn't have a round table,
Yeah.
so we could all sit around instead of all.
Well-
I'm just thinking it might be easier,
let's,
so we
I
all
know.
talk, if we had a round
But we-
table, we could all just sit and talk.
And we could be on Zoom would be better. You could share
We
documents.
can,
know?
in fact, switch to the room,
yeah.
Oh, that's it,
Back
yeah.
Equinox room, and sit around the table. It's capable of having these meetings and doing Zoom and having.
Especially if we're not having a large
It's a little
audience.
bit more
That's a lot
difficult
nicer.
for GNAT, but not impossible. We've done it before.
But GNAT could also they could share it off of the Zoom. So I'll talk to
We
them.
did it
about that.
before.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't get this thing.
I'm sorry about that.
They just pulled it in before.
And then if we could all
sign into Zoom, we could share documents.
Yes, we can still
Otherwise-
do that. You can still join this meeting and you could share documents up on
Yeah,
the
because it
screen.
makes it hard when you,
Yeah. Well, we
and
expected
if
an
you had a
audience, but,
document, you could
I don't
share
have
it.
paper.
all right.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, John.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
I think this is great. It's good.
Off to the races.
Yeah.